scary good. Welcome to the final chapter in our weekend-long scary werewolf mystery game party thing. Since YouTube has been playing fast and free with the distribution of these and the monetization as well, we decided to give you a recap of the entire party up till now. This new version will have the volume on the girls' screams reduced, since for some reason screaming could get you demonetized in 2019. If you haven't seen one or more of the previous chapters, here is your chance to get the entire story straight and make a guess at who the culprit is. If you've already seen the story up till now, then just jump to that time on the screen and you can go straight to the conclusion. Happy detectivizing, and let's get the party started. Welcome to our first ever secret Dogman murder mystery party. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Oh, wait a second. Turn off the color. Thanks. Submitted for your approval. Scary Stories has just gone back in time. It is now summer 1958. From now till Sunday night, we'll be having a werewolf-centered murder mystery party, reenacting one that allegedly took place in real life back around 70 years into your past. Do you know those murder mystery parties? Someone pretends to be murdered, someone pretends to be the murderer, and the other party guests have to guess who killed whom? You get to play someone other than yourself throughout the party, so people really have fun with it. Well, this is a story about one such party where the murderer wasn't just a murderer. In this particular party, the murderer was also a werewolf. Everyone we're about to tell you about died years ago, yet several of them have powerful and litigious estates and progeny. So we're going to be changing all names and some background facts. We also will be melding a few characters together, again, to protect ourselves legally, but also to simplify parts of the narrative. For these reasons and others, we are presenting this interactive and allegedly true Dogman mystery party as pure entertainment. Please enjoy, and good luck guessing who the werewolf is. Leave your guesses in the comments. I won't respond to any of them, but I will be keeping score, and we will announce the winner or winners, if there are any, at the conclusion, which is scheduled for Sunday night, Monday morning. We recently heard a long version of this legendary rumor told to us by someone claiming to be a descendant of one of the people who actually attended the original, real version of this party. It seems there was a certain entertainment producer back then who hosted parties he would invite his powerful or famous friends to out on his personal island located in a heavily forested area in a northeastern state. This is the character I will be playing for the weekend, the host of the party and owner of the island. This producer's heyday had been the mid to late 1930s, but by the time the events we are about to share with you occurred, it was the late 1950s. Oh, our producer friend was still rich, and he was still respected, but he was aging, and he was semi-retired. Some of the people attending his parties by this point were up-and-coming young talent, hoping to get a foot in the door of show business, while others were aging stars aiming to somehow reclaim their former glory, or reboot their careers one more time. I should say relaunch, since nobody in this story would have ever heard of the word reboot. This was a long time ago, in a very different kind of America. It will be your job to try to guess which of us is the actual werewolf, and we're only going to give you this one clue. The werewolf is definitely not Henry Lee Dogman. Wait, the Dogman isn't the werewolf? That's right. Are you sure about that? He's right, old dude. I'm going to be the one telling the story, the ancestor of the guy we got all this information from. So, therefore, I am not a suspect. That means it's one of you non-werewolves that must be the real werewolf. Got it? No? Awesome. Well, actually, I guess we're going to give you 2 clues to start off with, not 1. You see, while the rich and formerly famous partied in and around the mansion that weekend, at that same moment, out in the forest that took up most of the island, lurked a real-life monster. A dog-headed, hairy humanoid. But more about him later. Henry, why don't you take over talking to our YouTube friends? Great. Thanks, your old pal Bigfoot. Oh, you don't have to call me your old pal Bigfoot every time. You can just call me you're old. Oh, don't worry. That's what everyone calls you behind your back anyway. Well, welcome to the party, everyone. You all look lovely and or handsome in your fine 1950s party outfits. Please don't get too close to me. I lost my flea collar, and I don't want you to bring any uninvited guests home with you, if you know what I mean. Thanks. Please ignore my hairy wolf-like body and pretend for the weekend that I am a young, up-and-coming Broadway actor doing a brief moment in his early career when he was considered a genius. 5 years later, my character would be playing cartoon voices in commercials, but during this particular month in 1958, he was considered one of the most interesting young talents in New York, and so I got invited to this Puffington party out on Puffington Island. Since I'm the one telling the story, I'm the only one you can be certain isn't the killer. Every other living character is still on the table. First, I would like to remind you to be careful when you're here on the island. Although it's beautiful, it's also very natural, and therefore unpredictable and dangerous. If you venture past the gates of the mansion's grounds, you will enter what is essentially a northeastern American rainforest. 90% of this island is natural area which our host has personally chosen to protect. 2 biologists documented new species right here, and 3 other biologists disappeared into the forest, never to return. Who knows what new species they encountered? So, mind yourselves at all times. Anything can happen here, and often does. Now, let's introduce our chief suspects and possible victims. Each of these characters could possibly be the werewolf killer, and you're free to vote for any of them as your choice in the comments, as long as they are alive in the story. The good part about getting killed for them is that they would then no longer be a suspect. The bad part of getting killed is getting killed. There are all sorts of drawbacks to that, if you think about it. Fortunately, all of you joining the party via YouTube get to live, or at least we promise not to kill you. Not till after the party, at least. If the character you're voting for gets killed, feel free to choose your next candidate and keep playing. Next, I would like to thank those American girls, 3 of whom are playing characters in our mystery party today. Since this is an old-fashioned 1950s kind of story, sadly their main role will be to scream each time the werewolf shows up. First, we have Cutesy McPoo, America's cutest sweetheart, played by our own Chibi American. Aww, are you ready to scream for us, Chibi? Aw, isn't she the cutest thing? Next, there's the Hollywood ingenue character. Let's call her Debbie Hollywood, and she's played by Debbie American. Gee, okay, well, I'm glad you're prepared, Debbie. Next, we've got our beautiful young scientist who dreams of being an opera star character. Let's call her Maria Curie. She will be performed by Sophie American. Gee, okay, that's it, I'm deaf. Wait, am I speaking? Hello? I can't hear myself. Who else have I forgotten to remember? Oh, right, we have Dr. Death himself playing the Baron von Vonderbaron. The only way the Baron is actually Baron of anything is in the bereft sense, as in he's Baron of actual title and Baron of material wealth. The Baron is a fake title he adopted as a local TV horror show host, and somehow that got him included as part of intellectual society for this brief period, in a similar way as to my character. The Baron was an expert on B horror movies, as is Dr. Death, so this is especially good casting in my opinion. Tell me, America, is this the face of a werewolf killer? I mean him, not me. I know my face is that of a werewolf killer. Who else? Ah, yes, our final suspect. The old dude. Looking dapper for the evening. Thank you. He's playing a Hollywood hotshot writer-producer who specializes in spooky TV shows allegedly based on real events. He's been known to stage practical jokes and to pull gags for ratings. Before he became nationally known, he once showed himself live on local television staying in a haunted house until the station's sign-off at 4 a.m. Local businesses complained that their employees all came to work late and tired the next day, so you know the stunt was a success, but all the local businesses were also his station's local sponsors, and they all dropped his show. Going into this, he was my personal first choice as someone to watch out for. He was a trickster, and he might be filming us all this entire weekend for all we knew. Each of our suspects, aka guests, including myself, met at an agreed-upon location in town, the same location the original guests are supposed to have met up at. There, we were given our period costumes, similar to what the original guests wore, which we changed into. Then, we were driven in a stretch limousine to the only ferryman who travels all the way out here to this secret island. As the ferryman let us off, he informed us that he would not be back until midnight Sunday night. Now remember, we're in 1958, so we were gonna pretend there were no cell phones, no internet. Once we stepped off that ferry, it meant we would be on this island the entire weekend. The ferryman pointed out the path we needed to follow to get to the house, then departed. About 5 minutes of walking on a dirt road through a dense forest that blocked out the sun had succeeded in changing all our moods. The others had stopped laughing more than a minute prior, and when we heard the sound of thunder approaching from the distance, most of us groaned out loud. I had been walking out in front of the pack, and suddenly I heard a commotion behind me. Turning around, I was greeted with a massive figure running out of the bushes and trying to grab one of the women. I think it was Chibi. I saw her run away out of my line of sight, and the massive figure followed her. Then, I saw some of the men follow them, then the girls as well, and I didn't know what to do, since I wasn't really certain what had happened. I continued running down the dirt path, hoping to find the mansion and then come back with help. It was still another few minutes before the mansion was in my sight, and just then, the skies darkened to almost that of night. You could taste metal in your mouth like there was about to be a big storm. I was surprised to see all the people I had left behind me already in front of me at the front door. They were gathered around Chibi, who was sitting on the front steps. When I caught up, I saw that everyone was looking at the image she had shot on her cell phone. She said this was a picture of what had chased her into the woods in the first place. Do you want to see what her phone shot? Well, whether you do or don't, this is what I saw on her phone. And then, just like that, someone snatched the phone away from me. It was a little old angry lady in a period maid uniform, and she rudely informed all of us that the ferryman was supposed to have collected our phones. She didn't just take them from us, She patted us down like criminals to make certain that we didn't have any other kinds of devices on us. She placed all that she had collected in her apron and told us we could have them back when we left, but not 1 second sooner. I wondered out loud where the maid had come from, since the back door was still closed. I tried to open it but found it locked. While some of us banged on the door and asked to be let in, the maid screamed. Looking behind, we all saw a clearly injured gentleman, his butler uniform torn up, crawling desperately in our direction. Rushing to his aid, we all heard him tell us that he had been attacked by a werewolf. Then he passed out. The maid shouted in horror at the sight of the man she was now claiming was her husband, injured so badly. If she was acting, she was quite convincing. She ran toward the back door, which opened automatically at her approach, while it had remained locked for any of the rest of us. The butler or actor playing a butler, whatever it was, he was carried inside and to his bed, where the maid pushed everyone out of the room so that she could attend to him in private. At this point, our host Bigfoot arrived and introduced himself to those who didn't already know him. Bigfoot here is playing Arnold Puffington, the famous 20th century entertainment producer. He produced your grandfather's favorite shows, or maybe your great-great-great-grandfather's. His friends call him Puffy, and you're all his old pals. Don't make Sean Combs or Puff Daddy jokes to him. He's in 1958 for this entire weekend, and he won't understand anything you're saying. He's playing the OG Puffy, who was a puffy old white dude that died a year or two after this all took place. Anyway, we all informed Puffy Bigfoot that his butler had been attacked by a wolf man and that he needed to call for a doctor. Acting as though this were all one big annoyance, Bigfoot/Puffy tried the telephone, but he discovered, to nobody's real surprise, that the telephone was not functioning. That meant, of course, we could not call the ferryman back, and it meant we could not call a doctor to us. It meant that if we got hurt here during this weekend, we would have to help each other out and make the best of it. Or get our cell phones back from the maid. At this point, Puffy apologized for the absence of his staff and served us refreshments. It was at this moment that the murder mystery party began in earnest. We, none of us, had any idea what we had just seen was real and what was just part of the story. But let's just say, we hoped it was all just one big act. So we all had a fine meal and felt a little less on edge when Bigfoot, Puffy, stood to tell us a bit about the legend of the island. He said he hadn't planned on sharing any of this with us, but in the light of what we had already experienced and witnessed, he felt he had no choice but to give us this information. As he stood there speaking, he was framed by windows behind him, looking out onto the darkness. The storm clouds had darkened the scene so that you could not tell what time of day or night it was. And then, a lightning bolt shot across the sky. It was a big one. One of those lightning bolts that strikes, then flashes several times, and each flash lights up every single cloud in the sky and briefly flickers as bright as 10 suns, flashing all at once. And in those brief, flickering moments in which the sky was illuminated behind Puffy, we saw the silhouette of someone, or maybe I should say something much larger than he was, standing right outside that window. Something that looked exactly like this. To be continued later today and all weekend. Don't miss a chapter. See you later. Welcome back to our all-weekend Dogman mystery party. See if you can guess who is the werewolf, besides me. If you missed part 1 from this morning, go back and watch it now because we're not giving any recaps all this weekend. As the lightning flashed, we all saw it. The huge Dogman standing just outside the window. All of us, that is. Except for our host, Mr. Puffington, who was being played at the party by your old pal Bigfoot. I pointed behind him, and he turned to look, but at that very moment, the electricity in the house went out, plunging us all into darkness. People were shouting everywhere in the pitch black all around me, and chaos ensued for some time until the lights came back on, and I looked around. It was the butler who had flicked the lights back on. He was bandaged up, but otherwise very much alive. He looked directly at me and informed me that the other guests had scattered when the fuse blew, but that he had repaired it. I could see then that he and I were the only two left in the room. When had everybody else gone? So I wandered out toward where the others might be, focusing to try to make sense of everything for myself. I went over what happened, what I could take to be fact, and what I had better not assume as much about. I had seen that photo of what appeared to be a werewolf or dogman on Chibi's phone before all our devices were confiscated. I had seen an immense beast outside the window. Wait, let me slow down. I saw what appeared to be a 9 or 10 foot tall, very wide, hairy monster outside that window. But had I even seen it move? Maybe it was a trick. Maybe it was a cardboard cutout set up to scare us. The one thing I could be sure of was that if the monster was real, it was a creature living out in that forest. It couldn't possibly be one of the guests because we had all been in the dining room when we saw it the second time, and Chibi had photographed it outside on the day when it attacked the butler, so she and the butler and the maid couldn't be the monster either. I felt certain this was a natural or maybe supernatural beast, but one from the forest, not a shapeshifter from within this mansion. And then I saw them. I saw muddy dog tracks on the hallway floor. They seemed to appear out of nowhere in the middle of the floor, then continued down the hall and around the corner to the left. Cautiously, I walked to where the trackway began and looked up. There was some kind of glass and metal sunroof kind of thing up there, so the creature must have dropped down from up above when it came in from the outside. It looked to me like this thing was walking upright and bipedally, but I'm a city boy, so really what the heck do I know? It could have been walking on 5 or 7 legs. I'm certainly no expert. I did a mental inventory and realized I was carrying nothing at all which I could use for self-defense should a large monster come at me. Still, foolishly perhaps, I followed the huge dog tracks down the hall, taking care to make as little noise as I could in the process. As I reached the corner and peered around, I could see the room that the tracks led into. Sneaking around and over, I squinted inside and saw Chibi sitting in a chair and reading. She saw me and invited me in. The dog tracks stopped just inside the entrance to the library. I stopped too and looked around. Everything looked and sounded peaceful. There didn't seem to be a large dogman here, only little Chibi. What exactly was going on? I decided to ask Chibi about what she had seen and photographed when we first got to this island. I asked her how many of the others had seen the monster, and she said that as far as she knew, she was the only one who did. I told her my theory that the monster was something loose on the island, and she disagreed. I asked why, and she hesitated for a while before answering, with an expression that seemed to say I wouldn't believe her. After I pressed her for an answer, she asked me if I noticed who had left the room before that Dogman appeared outside the window. I told her that nobody had left, that we were all there. She said nothing in response, so I thought about it. Just because I hadn't noticed anyone leave didn't mean that they hadn't. To be honest with myself, once Puffington stood to speak, my attention was entirely on him, and I was seated most closely to him with my back to the others. Once I saw the werewolf-type creature outside, all my attention shifted to that. So the rest of the guests could have been replaced with circus clowns, and I might not have noticed. I turned Chibi's question back on her. Had she noticed anyone leaving the dining room just before we saw the Dogman outside the window? She stared down and said she wasn't sure. She didn't want to tell me something she wasn't sure about because then I would think that person was a werewolf. She refused to accuse anyone of something so horrible without proof. I reminded her this was all a game, and she asked me if I was so sure anymore. The truth was, I wasn't. We both sat for a while, lost in our thoughts. Finally, I broke the silence by asking her if she could tell me everything that she could remember about the thing that had chased her, including how she had gotten away. She reluctantly told me that she couldn't be certain, but she had the initial impression that the so-called monster was actually a man, and that it had been wearing some kind of dark clothing. Like the butler, I said before thinking, instantly regretting my big mouth. Yeah, she said, like the butler. But how did he get so messed up like that, I asked. I mean, if he's a werewolf, how did he end up being the one who got all beat up? Before she could say anything in response, we both heard it. It was a thump, but it seemed to come from every direction. It felt almost like some giant was banging on the top of the house with his fist. And then we heard the howling. But it was not from outside. It was from somewhere within this mansion. I grabbed Chibi by the hand and dragged her with me, wanting to keep my eye on her as much as possible for the rest of this weekend. Strictly for security reasons, so get your minds out of the gutter. It sounded to me as though people were gathering in the dining room, so we headed quickly in that direction when suddenly there came a scream from upstairs, and it was definitely Debbie. I was the first up the staircase, followed soon by some of the others. Debbie's chair in front of her makeup table was knocked down, and a trail of brushes and lipsticks led to a wall, and that was it. She was gone, as though she had been dragged through the wall itself. Chibi started crying, but I told her to save her tears for real tragedy. This was just a game. That's all it must be. Now, finally, I did my first head count. I should have been doing this from the start. I was here. Chibi was here. The Baron Dr. Death. The old dude, playing our TV executive character. Now the butler, Puffington, and Sophie showed up outside. When Chibi saw Sophie, she dove into her arms crying, and the two discussed their sister Debbie's disappearance through sobs and tears. So now everyone was here except Debbie and the maid, but any of them could have done it and then come back around behind us. Chibi was with me, so she couldn't have done the abduction. And how did whoever it was take her out of the room anyway? There was no door on that wall. Puffington casually walked over to that side of the room, tapped a particular spot on the corner with his toe, and a panel in the wall slid sideways. Surprising me, at least. A secret passageway. Who would know about that other than Puffington, the maid, and the butler? Maybe Puffington showed us because he knew we'd figure it out sooner or later anyhow, and he thought that revealing the secret to us would make him seem innocent. Or maybe he really was innocent and just showed us the secret passage in the interest of transparency. I hesitated. I wanted to go into the passageway, but I also wanted to keep tabs on everyone else here, and I had no allies I could trust to help me. So rather than go inside, I asked who else wanted to go inside. I had resolved to try to maintain whatever position would give me the greatest amount of information about the location and activities of the others. Bigfoot / Puffington, interpreting my decision as one of cowardice, sighed heavily and led us all inside. It's just a room these days as far as I know, he told us, showing where the doorway that once led elsewhere was now cemented over. I can tell that the abductor brought Debbie in here, but I have no idea where he brought her afterward, Puffy told us, adding, "You're free to search the room if you please, but tell me what you find, since it'll be a find to me as well." As far as I was concerned, things were just starting to get interesting when a chilling scream stopped us all in our tracks. I went running out of the secret room and into the main one, which was now empty. Running into the hall outside, I discovered that was also just as empty. Another scream, this time from the attic. Wasn't the maid, and Chibi was standing behind me, so it had to be Sophie. I asked Chibi what happened, and she said she didn't know. She had been in the secret room behind me the entire time and thought Sophie was with us until we all heard the scream. But was that true? Once again, I had gotten so caught up in the moment I had failed to continually make note of my surroundings. Was Chibi telling me the truth, or was she hiding something? Grabbing her hand and dragging her after me again, we were soon up the stairs where a crowd had gathered, insisting that Puffington open the door to the attic. He was saying it was probably very dusty up there, and he was embarrassed he hadn't cleaned it in his lifetime, and he was making all sorts of excuses not to open the door, but he was only making the others increasingly agitated. I did a head count. Debbie and Sophie were missing, obviously, as were the maid and the butler. I saw Chibi pleading with Puffington to open the door. I saw the old dude angrily eyeing Puffy and insisting the same. And Dr. Death, aka Baron von Vonderbaron, the horror show host, he was there too. But he seemed to be glaring at me for some reason. At any rate, the entire scene was anticlimactic, because it turned out that the door was stuck and we couldn't open it. It was one of those doors on the ceiling that you pull down, but it wasn't pulling down. So either they hadn't come this way, or they had, but had locked the door behind them on their side. Chibi was disconsolate and didn't want to talk to me anymore. I felt bad for having intruded on her time so much, and she went to her room to be alone and cry. I couldn't really blame her, and I felt a bit like a creep. That night, at dinner, Chibi wasn't there, and neither was the Baron von Vonderbaron, aka Dr. Death. Our host announced that both of them had become ill and were taking their dinner in bed in private. So, dinner that first evening was already down to just me, the old dude, and Bigfoot aka Puffington. The old dude was playing this somewhat eccentric yet also very cutthroat TV executive slash producer slash playwright who had been making a career by creating outlandish, exploitation, horror, and science fiction television, and then calling it true, or based on true stories, whether it was or not. He was known for using fake names and having more shows on TV than anyone actually knew he had on. Although not really famous to the general public, the guy was a legend within the industry. The money people loved him because he always turned a profit, but his crews hated him because he never failed to overwork and abuse them to the point of torture. He talked about himself through most of dinner and seemed ready to continue the dissertation about his own greatness afterward, when Puffington interrupted to ask us both about the supposed Dogman photo that Chibi had allegedly taken. He hadn't seen it himself, at least according to what he was saying. He wanted to know the circumstances of the sighting, but I had to admit that I had run forward, straight to the house, and had missed the entire episode, other than peripherally seeing something large chase one of the girls off. I told Puffy that the old dude had probably seen a lot more than I had, but he denied this vigorously and angrily. I apologized, but that didn't seem to satisfy the guy, and he began ranting about how I was trying to accuse him and blame him without having the courage to cite any actual evidence. I was doing no such thing, and quite frankly, I was a bit surprised and taken aback by his overreaction. He furiously insisted that he and I had both run up to the house together. I had absolutely no memory that matched what he was saying, but there was such a look of hatred in his eyes that I didn't think it would be prudent to challenge his assertion at that moment in time. I just shut up and watched the old dude hyperventilating, flushed, and trying to calm himself down as though he'd never been so insulted before. We sure had an interesting assemblage of people here, that was for certain. I felt like Oldie was lying, but he seemed so hurt and emotional. Could it be possible that I just didn't notice him running with me? As Chibi had pointed out, I had failed to make note of who was present or not on several other occasions after that. Maybe I really did run to the front door with the old dude, and maybe I just didn't notice or forgot. I really wished I had some kind of Star Trek video log to rerun the entire day with, and the weekend hadn't even really officially begun yet. Changing the subject, I insisted we should have already broken into the attic, or else we should be working to fix the telephone, or maybe we should get our cell phones back from wherever the stupid maid hid them. The so-called game had already become too stressful for me. I wasn't sure if it really was a game, or if something truly terrible had happened to Debbie and Sophie. I had been the one to invite them both, so I was racked with guilt and horror at their absence. It started raining outside again, and I watched from a window. I looked down, and then an unexpected flash of lightning outside startled me, and I looked up, only to see that same dog-headed monster man as before. It was inches away from me on the other side of the glass, standing perfectly still and staring directly forward, way over my head. Was it really alive? Was it a cardboard cutout or a large dummy? Rather than running in fear, I stared into the dark, trying to understand what I was actually seeing. And then, the thing I was looking at, it turned and looked at me. It was alive. I fell backward and crashed to the floor, looking up and up and up at the monster standing just outside. It was alive, and I knew now that it wasn't me or the old dude or Puffington, because they were with me when I turned around to say something to Puffington and Oldie, but I saw that I was alone. I was the only person in the room. When had the other two left? I looked up at the huge predatory-looking beast, which is something you're never supposed to do. I sat up, fully defenseless, and I called out to the huge living thing out there. I asked it, "Who are you?" In response, this beast's eyes locked onto mine, and his look turned from one of contempt to one of utter hatred and loathing. It leaned down toward me, and I was turned around and running away from that thing before I had the slightest idea what it was about to do. I felt like it was going to run right through that window and trample me, so when I heard it bellow behind me, every single hair on every part of my body stood on end in fear. I could hear glass breaking behind me, and I thought it actually had entered the house to end my life. I messed myself as I ran out of the room and straight into the bathroom, where I locked myself in and fainted dead away. When we resume the story, it will be morning, so why don't we resume it tomorrow, Saturday? I can't promise it'll be on by morning, but I can try. Episodes and clues continue to drop until we reveal all in our final solution episode, scheduled for Sunday night at midnight. Leave your guesses in the comments if you think you're starting to figure things out. See you tomorrow for Chapter 3. You hear that? That's construction. That's what it sounds like on Saturday morning here. It's a peaceful Saturday morning. The lovely sounds of the weekend that you wake up to here. Okay, we're going to do this episode anyway. We're just going to pretend that's construction going on the mansion while we're having our weekend-long werewolf mystery party. I awoke on the cold bathroom floor with someone banging on the door. Needless to say, I was confused for the first few moments. Then I remembered I had locked myself in the night before, having been afraid that I was being pursued by a Dogman. That's right, there was a Dogman at the window. Had it entered the house? I unlocked the bathroom door, wondering if Chibi had been right, and if the werewolf really was one of us. Before I could see her, I felt Chibi hugging me around my middle, and my eyes were met with the concerned faces of Puffington and the old dude, who both seemed glad to see me in one piece. It was the morning, and everything that had seemed frightening the night before seemed somewhat benign now in the daylight. Except for the green-faced Baron. He still glared at me as though he had some personal problem with me that I was unaware of. Chibi and Puffy invited me down to breakfast, but I told them what I craved more than food was to get off that island. The maid had our telephones, and we needed them back. I had no intention of spending another night on that island. Leading an angry mob of us down to the maid's room, I commenced banging on the door and demanding entry. The door opened by itself and revealed an empty room. It looked as though they had packed in a hurry. The place was in a mess. We searched everywhere for our phones, but found nothing. The old dude noticed an odd half-sized door in the back of the room, leading directly out onto the grounds. We all had to bend down to get through, even Chibi, and Puffington couldn't fit through it at all. On the grass outside were the light, but distinct and clear impressions of some sort of wheeled luggage. We could see exactly where the maid and butler had gone, and the trail led off into the woods. We followed it for about 20 minutes when I was certain I heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. I started running forward, hoping to be one of the people getting on that helicopter and getting off this island. Yes, I was concerned with Chibi's missing sisters, but I felt that the authorities would be better suited to search for them than me. I never ran so hard in my life. My lungs ached by the time I saw the copter itself. Unfortunately, I only succeeded in getting there in time to watch it take off and go. I definitely saw the maid looking out the window, and there were other people inside, but I couldn't see who or how many besides her and the pilot. I collapsed to the ground, planning on laying there for however long it took to get my breath back. The others ran past me. I was too exhausted to do a head count. I felt utterly defeated. I wasn't sure if we were caught in a complicated game or if we were genuinely in danger of losing our lives. At noon, we were called down to lunch served by Puffington himself. He made sandwiches, telling us they were the only thing he knew how to cook. Once again, Dr. Death glared at me while I made conversation with Chibi. She wasn't as happy as usual, but she was holding up well under the strain. I couldn't help but notice that the Baron seemed as unhappy with her talking to me as he was with me talking to her. After lunch, I wandered off with Chibi, and we watched the rain pour down outside one of the second-floor windows. I asked her what the deal was with the Baron, and she shot me a glance, then asked me what I had heard. I hadn't heard anything, and I told her so, but she didn't seem to believe me. "Who told you about us?" she wanted to know. I didn't know what she was talking about. Crying, she insisted she was just his good friend, and she stormed off, leaving me alone and very confused. Puffington came upon me and laughed at the expression on my face. I'm not sure what look I had on exactly, but I know I was feeling very confused inside. I asked him if Chibi had ever dated the Baron, and he laughed out loud. "No, but she did date this weird hippie guy once when she used to work here," he chuckled. "Wait, Chibi used to work for Puffington? Chibi?" I asked him to tell me more about that. Turns out her first paying job was as a maid in this mansion. That's how he met her sisters, those American girls. He started telling me about the hippie butler she used to date, but I wasn't really listening anymore by that point. I had never known about Chibi working for Puffington, and I now had a whole lot of thinking to do putting all this new information together. I basically said as much to Puffy and attempted to extricate myself from our conversation, but before I could, he pulled me aside and asked me if I knew the story about the old dude's second wife. He was trying to imply that the wife went missing. I could see where this was heading, that he wanted me to suspect the old dude of foul play. I wished I had my phone so I could just Google it and do some research on my own, but no such luck, as they say. Puffy acting like that about the old dude only made me wonder more about Puffy, not the old dude. It almost seemed like he was trying to misdirect me. This time, I did succeed in removing myself from the conversation and walked toward my room with no intention of actually going there. I still needed to walk around, and I still needed to think. Soon, I found I was unable to do either because I had been cornered, quite literally, by the old dude himself. He had a wild story to tell me about Puffington and how he had a quote-unquote kill list of enemies that kept turning up mysteriously missing. The old dude was trying to imply that this could be a long list of werewolf killings. We had reached that point in the weekend where the remaining suspects were all growing completely paranoid and suspicious of each other. Or else, they were pretending to be in order to throw people off their own trail. Bigfoot wanted me to think it was the old dude, and the old dude wanted me to think it was Bigfoot. Kind of seemed to me like they both had something to hide. The old dude ranted on and on in a frantic manner, and at first, my mind wandered, just thinking him a lunatic. But he said something that caught my attention. Something about Puffington being the first sponsor of the Baron's TV program. It seemed the Baron had wowed Sir Puffington at their first meeting by appearing in Puffy's private office prior to Puffy's arrival. He performed other magic tricks that impressed the millionaire, who decided to help the Baron get his own program on a local television station. The old dude sneered. Puffy thought he was so smart. He didn't realize that the Baron had already known Puffington for years. We both heard footsteps approaching, and the old dude scurried off, like Gregor the human cockroach. I didn't wait to see who it was myself. I had a sudden, very strong desire to be completely alone, so I could think. I decided to grab a piece of paper and find a quiet place, and I decided to figure out what I knew for certain and what I needed to find out next. I suggest you do something similar, and I hope to see you back for our next chapter. Tomorrow, Sunday. Remember, we've got 2 episodes tomorrow. Happy detectiving, Dogman hunters. After about an hour of sitting alone, jotting down any detail that seemed to be of any possible importance, one of the most important ideas that seemed to keep re-emerging in my mind is that I felt strongly that the remaining people on the island should all remain within sight of each other for the rest of the weekend, with the exception of bathroom breaks, obviously. Folding my notepaper up and sticking it in a pocket, I decided to go down to dinner a bit early. When I got there, Chibi and the Baron were having a conversation, but they stopped when I came in. Chibi looked down and away, while the Baron glared at me again. "Nice to see you, too," I offered, then went and sat down at the table. Neither of them seemed interested in continuing their prior conversation, so I introduced a new topic, that of us all remaining together for the rest of the weekend for the sake of safety. Chibi was unimpressed with my idea. "If one of us is a werewolf," she reasoned, "wouldn't your plan actually ensure that everyone would be at the greatest risk? Wouldn't your plan make certain that we all slept right next to the monster?" She and the Baron laughed at me and left together. I can't remember how long I sat there trying to think of a snappy comeback before Puffy Bigfoot walked in and once again laughed at my expression. And again, I didn't really know what his laughter meant. This time, he was joined by the old dude. I mentioned to Puffy that Oldie had said the Baron's career was actually started by Puffy himself, and the old Bigfoot dropped his glass. He didn't seem angry as much as he seemed shocked, and he told us we were both crazy and that nothing of the kind had ever occurred. Oldie pressed him, though. He asked if it weren't true that he knew the Baron for a long time before getting him the TV gig. Puffy denied it. Oldie asked if it weren't true that the Baron had held seances on this very island and summoned the voices of the dead. Puffy denied it. Oldie asked if it weren't true that the Baron had even summoned the spirit of Puffy's old butler. Puffy denied it, but seemed completely shaken up. Wasn't it true that the butler blamed Puffy for his death? Why? Why would the butler blame Puffy for his death? I don't know, shouted Puffy. I swear I don't know. I have no idea. Stop tormenting me with your questions. And he ran out of the room. So much for my plan of keeping us all in the same place all night. What should plan B be? Locking myself in the bathroom again? It turns out I was close. We all locked ourselves in our bedrooms that night, and as far as I knew, nothing of note happened. Finally, it was Sunday morning, our last day on this island. If we could just survive this one last day, the ferryman would come get us at midnight. I was surprised to find everyone spent the morning and afternoon playing bridge and chess, whiling away the hours like seniors in a home. I spent my time by one of the windows, watching the forest, with as much interest as I paid my fellow inmates in this temporary asylum. When the day grew dark, though, so did the mood. We all knew this was the third and final night of the full moon, even if the cloud cover wouldn't let us view it with our own eyes. We all knew that if we survived until midnight, we'd have to walk that dirt path through the woods in the dark to get to the ferryman. As the reality of it all approached, tensions grew more severe. I wasn't the only one who wasn't sure if any of this was still a game. I wasn't the only one who wondered if we were about to walk right back into a real-life horror movie. The day had already been dark with the rainy weather, but the night made it seem oppressively dark. In my wanderings around the mansion, I ran into Dr. Death, aka the Baron. I was about to ask him a question and try to start up a conversation when he shushed me and pointed to the hallway rug. It had those same kind of large dog prints, same as I had seen the other day. Silently, the Baron and I followed the tracks as they led past a study that we found Chibi in. We motioned for her to follow us, then continued as the tracks passed a small library that the old dude was inside. We silently asked him to join us as well. Now, the four of us were creeping around this old mansion, looking for... What exactly were we looking for? Trouble is what we were looking for, following large dog prints. But this is what we did. At some point, I noticed that the tracks seemed different looking somehow. I thought they were looking more like shoe prints than dog prints, but since most of the mud was now clearly off whatever had been making them, it was kind of hard to tell exactly what we were looking at anymore. Maybe they had always been shoe prints, someone walking on their toes possibly? Whatever they were, they led into a room down at the end of a dark hall that I had never been down before. Bravely, foolishly, and impatiently, I was the first to peek into that room. I saw Puffington in there. Soon we all did. Then I saw him do something with his foot, and a sliding panel slid open. I would know that scream anywhere. Would you? And so, the door panel slid open, the scream rang out, and we all ran into the room before Puffy could make a move. Debbie and Sophie were in that room beyond the panel. Is this where he was keeping them? Seeing us, Puffington stopped in his tracks and turned around, facing everyone. It's not what it looks like, he began, but nobody was interested. They just wanted to see if Debbie and Sophie were okay. Soon, all three of those American girls were hugging each other. Honestly, Puffington insisted, I'm not the one who kidnapped them. Someone else did and tried to frame it on me. I know who it is, and when I realized what was going on, I came here to see if they were being held in this secret room. I asked both girls if this were true. Was Puffy not the actual kidnapper? Both of them looked guilty and seemed to make eye contact with the Baron. This has something to do with you, Baron, asked Puffington, doesn't it? What is your connection to these girls? And how do you seem to know about the secret passageways in my home? Why do people keep claiming that I've known you for longer than I actually have? And when you get done with those, I've got a million more questions for you too. We all demanded answers. I asked him what the involvement of Chibi and the other girls really was. Why were they all trying to make Puffington look like he was the werewolf and abductor? Finally, the Baron, played by Dr. Death, spoke.
Okay, it's true. Well, some of it. Chibi had nothing to do with it, or not much. She's just a loyal friend, that's all.
Aww.
Yes, it's true that I used to be the butler here at the Puffington estate. That's how I knew all about the secret passageways and tunnels, even the ones Puffington thought were sealed up. He had foolishly put me in charge of sealing them.
What poppycock? This man was never my butler. I really mainly know him from his delightful television program.
Hooray!
Of course you don't recognize me, Puffy. It's because this isn't my real face. It's just the face I use to portray the Baron von Wunderbaron on TV. My real face looks like this. Does it make sense now, Puffy? Does it all now fall into place?
Carruthers! Great heavens! I thought you were
dead? And how did you think I had died, eh, Sir Puffington? As for the rest of you, yes, I was that large gray werewolf you saw outside the window. But I wasn't the werewolf that Chibi photographed. No, that was somebody else entirely. Wasn't it, Puffy?
It's true. I admit it. I am afflicted with lycanthropy myself, and I...
Say it, Puffy.
I was the werewolf that bit the Baron in the first place. I thought my bite had killed, but now I see it was I who gave him lycanthropy, and it is I who must battle him to the death.
All of you. It's midnight. The ferryman should be back any second. Run to him and get off this island while you still can. Forget about me. We all have our fate, and this is mine. Farewell.
The two huge dogmen set to fighting each other. We never witnessed such a battle before, but we realized we had better leave, and so we did. Together we made our way to the ferryman, who had our cell phones. We immediately called the authorities to the island, but who knew what they would find by the time those two behemoths stopped battling? Who knew what would be left on Dogman Island? Come back tomorrow when Dr. Death hosts an all-new scary story. In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdigi and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description.
Come back for more scary stories.